Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss the fourth quarter update from Delta, JetBlue, and Southwest, and the state of negotiations between airlines and flight attendants in the U.S. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how are you doing this week?
I'm great, Ned. How are you?
Doing well. Counting down the days for my holiday travel. I finally have all of my tickets booked and am looking forward to some full flights.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure they'll be full. It's seems like that based on what some of the U.S. airlines have been saying. That's for sure.
That's right. So as we went into the fourth quarter in October, there's been some concern about weaker off-peak demand, especially through the end of the year as we go into the winter, mostly because corporate travel is not back where it was. But we've had some updates from Delta, JetBlue, and Southwest that are saying that some of those concerns might have been overblown.
Yeah, and I think from what we've heard from all three, it's pretty clear that the Thanksgiving holiday period was excellent in terms of demand. Very busy. The yields were good, and every indication is that the that continues into the current holiday period and into 2024. So it's yeah, I mean there you have it from a demand perspective. Still a very rosy scenario.
Which is great for the airlines. I mean, especially JetBlue jumped out at me because they were one that was forecasting some significant slowdown in off-peak periods. But Delta and its peers, American United, all pretty much forecast strong demand, if not as robust. What I'd love to see is a Spirit and a Frontier update, but I don't know if we're going to be getting that before the holidays.
Right. And I wouldn't be surprised if demand even for those two airlines are okay. I know they've had some issues with perhaps excess supply in certain markets. Now, I think it's important to step back a minute and to note that we are just talking about demand here. There are things going on the cost side that we'll talk about a little bit later in this podcast. It's also very important to point out that JetBlue does still expect a loss for the fourth quarter, which is definitely
Yes.
not welcome. So, just being very specific here, they said that, quote, demand for travel remains healthy since late October. Close-in bookings have outperformed expectations. So those close-in bookings are typically business travelers or higher paying passengers.
Right.
And they said that was true for both the holiday peak and non-holiday travel periods. So you can see something is happening on the cost side because they seem to say over on the revenue and demand side things are good. So what exactly is happening on the cost side? We'll get to some labor stuff in a minute. Interestingly enough, I mean, fuel prices have been going down quite a bit over the past few
Yep.
weeks, which you think would be a very good thing. It is a very good thing for airlines,
For
but
most airlines, yes.
yeah, for most airlines, unless you are heavily hedged, which in the case of Southwest actually has their fuel forecast actually increased. So they're now expecting to pay more for fuel than they were when they previously gave a fourth quarter estimate, which I guess was a few weeks ago. So
I
they're
like
now
to say when hedges give and hedges take, it's a
yes,
two-way
giveth
street
and
on that.
taketh.
Giveth and taketh. It's for
Right.
sure.
Right. And Southwest certainly, over the very long term has a very, has an excellent record in terms of coming out ahead on hedges, but doesn't seem to be working in their favor right now. So we should see some of the other airlines benefit from the hedges. JetBlue, and I don't know off the top of my head, I know they did not have hedges. I don't know, maybe they put some on more recently. Their fuel guidance, I'm looking for it in front of me. Yeah, it's pretty much unchanged. A slight decrease to what they expect to pay. So they previously said they were going to pay 305 to 320. Now the estimate range is 305 to 315, so a little bit down on that the worst case scenario end. But yeah, not too much change there. And some of that is regional too. Certain regions of the country will pay higher than others. I know
Right.
The West Coast was very high in the third quarter. Alaska talked a lot about that. So there's a lot of variance when you're talking about fuel prices, but um, yeah, the spot prices are going down, so they should if that trend continues, that should be a good thing.
That's a good thing. So one of the things that as we've been talking about demand and planes being full that just came up is Southwest and their capacity. Now we've talked about in the past how all of the U.S. airlines are going to be are slowing capacity growth into the new year, especially to get some stronger some more control over the price picture. Maybe that'll slow down. Those cuts will slow a little bit as we see strong demand, but Southwest, and I looked at their update, they are growing in the 20% range in the fourth quarter. Now, I know that a lot of that is simply annualizing growth that they already did and not necessarily new flights in the fourth quarter, but that is still an astronomical number. And to think they've got to get in their long-term outlook is to get in the low to mid single digits. So they have a lot of growth pullback coming. And I can't speak for Southwest Network team, but it definitely feels like we're going to be seeing a lot less new routes and new markets from them next year
Right.
as they're pull back and just try to let everything that they've added sort of mature.
Yes, and you'll have to correct me if memory doesn't serve here, but I believe in the fourth quarter of 2022 is when they had their big operational meltdown, and they kind of lost a lot of ASMs from that. So when
Oh,
they
I forgot about that. Yes, thank you, Jay.
yeah,
That special item that adds a couple points to their guidance. That yes, you're right.
right. I don't know how much. I mean, I don't know if you kind of remove that as a factor, what their increase was. There definitely is the situation where Southwest has had trouble re sort of trouble restoring the capacity that it cut during the pandemic as quickly as it would have liked. It's had Boeing aircraft delivery delays. The MAX 7, which is very important to their future network and network plans, that has yet to be certified by the FAA. You
Yep.
had pilot training issues with pilot captain shortages and things like that. So there's a lot of catch up still being played, and then all the while at the same time, what's going on Southwest is they're really and the CEO Bob Jordan talked about this at the Skift Aviation Forum whenever it was back in October. The whole idea is that they're trying to update their network to reflect changes in demand that have occurred since the pandemic, and one big one being that these short haul think of like intra-California routes that typically had a lot
Yep.
of business traffic on it. A lot of that business traffic is not there, hasn't come back, so they're kind of migrating planes to more leisure oriented markets and whatnot. They've opened a lot of new markets even during the pandemic, so a lot going on in their network. Now they did say that over the long term, kind of beyond 2024, they plan on slower growth than they were originally planning. And they, just I think that was partially just acting out of caution. We want to make sure we hit certain financial goals, and it's kind of easier to hit them if we restrain capacity than if we grow. It's better to grow sometimes too slowly than too quickly.
Oh,
So it's a little more.
absolutely. I mean, it's the
Mhm.
number one lever that airlines have to
Yeah,
control pricing is to slow growth or shrink. And of course, I mean, we're still looking at costs that are well above 2019 levels. So complete shrinking is not on the table, but slowing growth very much is.
right. And the we'll also have to see, as I mentioned before, they are not. They're actually getting hurt by their hedges right now. So fuel is sort of a bad guy on their income statement, or will be this quarter. And you have to. If I had to guess, they'll make money this quarter, unlike JetBlue. But how what would our margins be? I don't know. I mean, their margins have been kind of weak recently, so
Yeah.
they kind of have a lot to prove going forward, going into 2024. I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. Southwest is it's not the strong profit maker that it once was. I have to say it's losing money, but like you said, it's not the high margin, reliable business that it was for many decades.
Right. It's sort of yeah. I have here in front of me in the fourth quarter of last year. That was the year of the huge operational blow up. They lost $226 million, negative 6% operating margin. And then in the first quarter, they lost money again, negative 5% margin. So they really, really had a rough 6 months, a rough winter. And a lot of that, to be fair, was the operational stuff. And, you could sort of put that out. That seems to be, they seem to have addressed that. Operations have been pretty smooth, really, for all the airlines, from what I understand. I don't know if you've heard anything otherwise, Ned, but I think operationally, airlines had a really good Thanksgiving and things
Yeah,
have been pretty smooth since.
things were good. A good Thanksgiving, pretty smooth sense. I have to say, I don't think we've had any major weather patterns across the US in the last few weeks. I mean, there's been weather, not saying there's
That
not been
helps.
weather, but
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
no big storms. Knock on wood, hopefully it stays that way. I will be taking my kids out to Colorado, so watching Denver weather, which remember the storm that disrupted Southwest hit Denver and Chicago and everything all at the same time last Christmas. So hoping
Yeah,
that we don't have a repeat of that.
that was kind of the origin of the debacle, wasn't it? Denver was where it all started.
Yes, yes. So, but
You're
yeah,
going into the eye of the storm, Ned. Be careful.
yeah. Watch this Christmas be 50s and sunny the whole time, as Denver can be in the middle of winter. But yeah, the operations have been reliable, and that's one reason why capacity is up. JetBlue acknowledged that in their update that their capacity is going to come in at the high end of their guidance range because they've operated better than they expected in the fourth quarter so far.
Yeah, right. No, that's a good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. It's the when you operate better than you expect, when you plan your capacity and you tell Wall Street, hey, we're going to produce this many ASMs this quarter, what an airline will do is it will factor in, okay, we'll probably cancel, X% of our ASMs because of weather or this or that, or uh, and then if you actually do better than that, if you if you don't cancel as much and you fly more, then you wind up with more ASMs, and that has implications for your unit revenues, your unit costs, and whatnot. But yeah, you keep that in mind. So JetBlue, as you mentioned, Ned, they came out and they said, "Hey, we're going to actually do." I'm looking at it here for the fourth quarter. Our year-over-year ASMs are going to be up 2 to 3%. They previously said it was only going to be up about 1 to 3.5%. Well, it was kind of a bigger range, but in any case, 2 to 3%. So they, I think some of that capacity was that they're going to fly. They may have, expected to have canceled. Now, of course, December's not done, so
Yeah, yeah.
we
Like
don't
I
know.
said, it's yeah,
We
December's
don't know
not
what's going to
done.
happen in JFK this
We
this.
might be having a live year-end podcast from a plane stuck on the tarmac. No, let's hope that doesn't
Oh,
happen.
please no.
Gosh, please no. But yeah. Well, with that, we're looking at strong holidays. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to talk about labor. And we're back, Jay. So I did a fairly lengthy story looking at the situation U.S. airlines face with their flight attendants unions. Now, this is a prominent issue. We've got most major flight attendants in negotiations right now, most major airlines in negotiations with their flight attendants. American, Southwest, United, Alaska, Spirit are all in talks. And to be honest, they're not going well. Southwest flight attendants overwhelmingly rejected a new tentative agreement that had 36% pay raises over 5 years. This past a week ago, and American Airlines flight attendants are seeking release from mediation to enter the 30-day cooling off period before a potential strike. So it's tensions are rife.
You have two things going on. You have tensions. Tensions are rife, as you said. At the same time, every time there is a deal that is a new contract is signed, it's a very expensive one. There's a lot of inflation that airlines are having to stomach, and that is, I think, we're already seeing that take a toll on earnings. Now, the fear is are we entering another one of these cycles? We saw this, after in the early 2000s, for example, where
Pre
there were a
nine
lot of,
11, pre 9/11,
yeah,
right? Yep.
Yep, right. You had contract signed this right before 9/11, exactly. Because if you remember, I mean, this is going way back, but the late 90s was just a very, very lucrative time, but relatively speaking for US airlines. And so labor unions justifiably wanted hefty pay raises. They got them, but then when demand started to turn post 9/11, it started to get real hairy, and a lot of these airlines wound up in bankruptcy. I'm not saying anything like that extreme is anything to worry about, but we could be entering in one of these cycles where you do have labor costs that are kind of getting a little bit uncomfortable, let's say. Now airlines would argue, no, we're in a totally different world now. It's a much more consolidated marketplace than it was, post nine. There's all sorts of argument. Now we've got all these ancillary revenues, and we're, we better revenue management systems, and on and on and on. But it's labor can be 30-40% of an airline's cost if you've got inflation. That's very heavy. It definitely adds a layer of significant risk. Now,
Oh
nobody knows
yeah,
what's going to happen with fuel prices. So, and so what's
right,
going to happen
right.
with revenues. And so it's hard to predict, but, those labor costs are very sticky. You can't get rid of them as quickly as you can some other costs.
Absolutely. Melius research analyst Connor Cunningham did analysis, and assuming a 20% pay increase across all U.S. carriers for flight attendants, that would cost the industry about 1.9 billion annually, and that'd be a point of CASM-ex at each carrier, give or take a few, a decimal or two. So it's not an insignificant thing. Now, I spoke to a number of the flight attendant unions, and the sentiment is they are, quote, furious, as Sarah Nelson, the head of the Association of Flight Attendants, said. And the things that she cited are, flight attendants were really on the front lines during the pandemic. They were the ones dealing with unruly travelers. They've seen executive compensation rise after CARES Act restrictions fell. They've seen pilots get these historic raises, and like you said, inflation. I looked at what the Minneapolis Fed's consumer price index is, and prices are 18% higher today than they were in 2019. Now, looking at American, they have not received a raise since January 2019. They're flight attendants, so they've effectively seen their pay go down by 18%. So if you give every flight attendant a 20% raise, effectively that's only 2% compared to 2019. So there's a lot of arguments like for a 36% raise, which Southwest flight attendants were going to get if they hadn't rejected the contract, is really only 18% once you count for inflation. And then you think, oh, that's over 5 years. So, I mean, annual inflation rate of 3% per year. I mean, really, they're coming out just a little ahead.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I know we were chatting about this yesterday, Ned. And by the way, we didn't say when we're talking. It's
Oh,
Wednesday.
yeah.
Yeah, Wednesday, or maybe you did, but anyway, it can't hurt to say again. Wednesday, December 13th, in the afternoon here. So East Coast, New York time. So yes, you make a good point about how these sometimes the headline figure, 40% wage or whatever wage increase, it sounds like, whoa, I want a 40% wage increase, but yeah, you do have to consider that that's often over multiple years, and there have been multiple previous years where they've gone without a raise. So yeah, that's you do have to look at that carefully. It's a very good point. So yeah, and a lot of these, frankly, a lot of these contracts are not just about wages. They're also about work rules, which you hear from labor negotiators. They increasingly say that that's almost become more important, like some of the work rule issues and vacation time, things like. There's just a lot. These collective bargaining agreements are very complex, and that's why they sometimes take years to negotiate. So that's just definitely something to consider. You mentioned what was the adjective that Sarah Nelson used? We're
Furious was the
furious,
word.
furious.
Yes, yes.
I think the Southwest pilots wouldn't mind using that adjective either. I think they probably share that sentiment. There's been a lot of frustration there, the Southwest pilots. want a contract. Do we have so we have
Yeah.
Delta has their contract done,
Delta. So if we're talking about flight attendants, Delta flight attendants
or
are
how
not
about the
union.
pilots, Ned?
The
How about the
pilots, we have most pilot groups are done. Southwest, I think, is the only major
is the only big one
outstanding.
left? Okay,
Yeah,
or the big airlines, yeah,
it's the
the
flight
real big
attendants
ones.
contracts that are really, really contentious right now. And I asked Sarah Nelson if we could potentially see a strike in the U.S., which we haven't in more than a decade. And she didn't say a strike, but she said she doesn't see a way that flight attendant contracts are done without a credible strike threat, was the word she used. Now, like I said, American Airlines flight attendants have already asked to be released from negotiations, and that would begin a 30-day cooling off period to a strike, and that could, you know, it's potential we could see the first major in labor action at a U.S. airline since 2010. Though, asterisk, it probably would be a chaos or create havoc around our system strike. So, and for those who are unfamiliar, that means the airline continues operating. Flight attendants say we can hit any flight at any time. So you could board your flight, say from DFW to LAX, and the crew gets up and walks off, and that flight is on strike. So it yeah, we could see that
It's
though. it's
the
it's
United Auto Workers used something similar to that this summer, or whenever it was this fall. They where they were striking. It wasn't a total strike. It was we're going to hit this plant, we're going to hit this plant, and this plant over here, and this plant. So yeah, these strikes can take different forms. It may not just be a total shutdown, but we don't know. And for
yeah, we
those
don't know. Yes, exactly.
yeah, you don't really know what the strategy is by the union, but I think we should just quickly explain for if anyone's listening who's new to the industry or doesn't not familiar with the rules that kind of govern labor relations in the airline industry. It's very difficult to strike. It's not something. It's a lengthy process, as Ned mentioned. There are negotiations that happen at some point. If one side is just completely frustrated, say we're making no progress, they have to appeal to the National Mediation Board and ask for to be released from negotiations. And at that point, you get that 30-day cooling off period that Ned mentioned. And then there's all sorts of steps beyond that before a strike can actually happen. The president can step in. They can create an emergency board. Congress can ultimately step in, which we saw actually in the railroad industry last winter. So it's nothing that's going to happen imminently,
No,
but
this is not a concern for anyone's holiday travel. Let's
right,
put
exactly.
that
Yeah,
out there
important to
now.
say. We don't want to scare anybody here, but perhaps maybe by the spring, you
Yeah,
never know.
yeah. And
But do
I'm
you
I'm I'm
think?
gonna drop this in the podcast notes. Planet Money did a great podcast on the chaos strike strategy, and it was pioneered at Alaska Airlines in the
Yeah, I heard
90s.
that actually.
And I'll drop it in the podcast notes, but I recommend everyone give it a listen, and how Alaska Airlines flight attendants won pay increases and I think they only canceled like 6 or 8 flights in the entire strike. But yeah, it
Yeah, that
works.
was a good discussion. When was the last major airline strike, Ned? I'm thinking the Spirit pilots, but there I'm missing one. That was a
No,
long
so
time ago.
Spirit Pilots was the last one in 2010. But remember,
2000.
Spirit was a fraction of the size they are today back in
Yeah,
2010. The
they were
last
tiny.
major airline to go on strike were mechanics at Northwest in
Mm.
2005. And
2005, which was during
yes,
during bankruptcy, probably right before bankruptcy.
I think it might be right before
I
they
I
went
wrote a
into
book about
bankruptcy.
this, Ned. I should probably remember, but
I am not
but
sure, but so it's been nearly 20 years since a major airline was affected by a strike. And even then, the mechanic strike didn't shut down Northwest. It only, they were canceling, I want to say, a quarter of their flights. But
yeah, so you
yeah,
can see that they're pretty rare, and
yeah.
airline strikes are rare.
Unlike in Europe, where strikes seem to be happening every month with
Yes.
someone.
Thank you for clarifying, because we are just talking about the U.S. here. This you go to Europe or elsewhere in the world, and completely different set of rules. And yeah, strikes are very, very common in Europe. They tend to be brief and uh, not quite as damaging. But yeah, completely different story in other jurisdictions. We're just talking about the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Anyway, we will see what happens. There are more talks to come, and the general consensus I got from everyone I spoke to about flight attendants is once a contract is ratified, we are likely to see that contract essentially repeated across several airlines. It's just getting to that first deal that's across that, it makes it across the line.
So that's kind of a template for others to
Yes,
go.
yes.
Right,
And
right.
that's what the cost will reset to that level. Most of the major airlines, that's gonna be it. But with
Yeah.
Southwest rejecting, it's anyone's question when who gets across that line first. And I asked Sarah Nelson if she would make a guess, and she politely declined. So
You can see it does make it difficult for union negotiators because, they're not ultimately when they agree to a tentative deal, they're sort of assuming that their members will be happy with it. But as we saw with the Southwest flight attendants, the members were not happy with it, so they voted it down. So I think it's a difficult for the union leaders who are actually doing the negotiation. It's sometimes difficult to know exactly what the members will and won't accept. And we'll see, if they go back now. I mean, they're going to have they're going to renegotiate now and see if they can come up with something that's more acceptable to the members, and we'll see if they can do it. But
I have
yeah,
two words
it's
for
gonna be
you.
tricky.
Two words for you, Jay. Boarding pay. That seems to be what every flight attendant wants right now.
Okay, interesting. Mm-hmm.
And that was not in the Southwest agreement. So I don't know, and I don't know if that was the reason that it was rejected. But everyone I spoke to says there's a lot of pressure from the flight attendant side for boarding pay. So we shall see.
Yeah, okay, interesting. We'll keep an eye on it. All right, Nick.
Jay, always a pleasure. And listeners, if you want to contact me, you can reach me at er@skift.com. You can reach Jay at js@skift.com. Jay?
Okay, Ned. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.